Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be delving into one of the most significant yet often overlooked conflicts of the 20th century, the Korean War. Often referred to as the Forgotten War, this brutal conflict lasted from 1950 to 1953 and set the stage for decades of tension on the Korean peninsula. Now, you might be wondering why this war, which claimed millions of lives and nearly led to a nuclear confrontation, has faded from public consciousness. Well, I believe it's partly due to its position in history, sandwiched between the cataclysm of World War II and the prolonged quagmire of Vietnam. But make no mistake, the ramifications of this war are still felt today, from the heavily fortified border between North and South Korea to the ongoing nuclear tensions with the North Korean regime. But before we dive into the conflict itself, it's crucial to understand the context in which it erupted. Korea had been under Japanese colonial rule for 35 years until the end of World War II in 1945. The defeat of Japan left a power vacuum on the Korean peninsula, and like so many other regions in the post-war world, it became a battleground in the emerging Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel, with the Soviets occupying the north and the Americans the south. This division, initially intended to be temporary, would prove to be the spark that ignited the war. Korea was not included in the Strategic Asian Defense Perimeter outlined by United States Secretary of State Dean Acheson. The war began on the 25th of June 1950, when North Korean forces, backed by the Soviet Union and China, crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. Now, it's important to note that this wasn't a spontaneous action. Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, had been planning this invasion for some time and had secured the support of both Stalin and Mao Zedong. The North Koreans justified their assault with the rather dubious claim that South Korean troops had attacked first and that they were merely responding to aggression. This, of course, was a fabrication, but it served its purpose in providing a veneer of legitimacy to the invasion. The initial phase of the war was marked by rapid North Korean advances. The South Korean forces, poorly equipped and trained, were quickly overwhelmed. Within days, Seoul, the capital of South Korea, had fallen. The speed and ferocity of the North Korean assault took the United States and its allies by surprise. President Truman, who was initially hesitant to commit American forces to yet another foreign conflict so soon after World War II, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. He saw the North Korean invasion not just as a local conflict, but as part of a broader communist strategy of expansion that needed to be contained. If the communists were permitted to force their way into the Republic of Korea without opposition from the free world, no small nation would have the courage to resist threat and aggression by stronger communist neighbours. The United States quickly sought UN approval for military intervention, which was granted in the absence of the Soviet Union, who were boycotting the Security Council at the time. This was a crucial moment, as it marked the first time that the UN had authorized the use of force to repel an aggressor. The UN forces, primarily made up of American troops, but also including contingents from 20 other nations, entered the war under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. Now, MacArthur was a controversial figure, a brilliant tactician but also notoriously headstrong and prone to insubordination. His leadership would prove both a blessing and a curse for the UN forces. Initially, the UN forces were pushed back to a small perimeter around the port city of Busan in the southeast of Korea. But MacArthur, in a brilliant and daring move, launched an amphibious landing at Incheon, far behind enemy lines. This operation, which I consider to be one of the most audacious and successful in military history, caught the North Koreans completely off guard. It allowed UN forces to recapture Seoul and push the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel, but MacArthur, emboldened by this success, pushed for permission to advance into North Korea itself, with the goal of reunifying the peninsula under South Korean control. This decision, while initially successful, would have far-reaching consequences. I will defend Korea as I would my own country, just as I would California. As UN forces approached the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China, the Chinese government became increasingly alarmed. They had warned that they would intervene if UN forces crossed the 38th parallel, but these warnings were largely ignored by MacArthur and the UN command. In October 1950, Chinese forces, under the guise of volunteers, crossed into North Korea. This intervention completely changed the complexion of the war. The Chinese, battle-hardened from years of civil war and led by experienced commanders like Peng Dehuai, launched a series of massive offensives that drove UN forces back across the 38th parallel. The entry of China into the war created a dilemma for the United States. MacArthur, frustrated by the new restrictions placed on his conduct of the war, began to openly advocate for expanding the conflict into China proper, even suggesting the use of nuclear weapons. This put him at odds with President Truman, who feared that such actions could lead to a wider war with the Soviet Union. The disagreement eventually led to Truman relieving MacArthur of his command in April 1951, a decision that was highly controversial at the time but which I believe was necessary to prevent the conflict from spiralling out of control. Following MacArthur's dismissal, the war settled into a bloody stalemate along a line roughly following the 38th parallel. For the next 2 years, the conflict would be characterised by gruelling trench warfare reminiscent of World War I, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. After 2 years of bloody stalemate, both sides finally agreed to negotiate an armistice. The talks, held at Panmunjom, were protracted and often acrimonious, with issues like the repatriation of prisoners of war proving particularly contentious. Finally, on the 27th of July 1953, an armistice was signed. It's crucial to understand that this was not a peace treaty. Technically, the two Koreas remain at war to this day. The armistice simply froze the conflict in place, creating a demilitarized zone roughly along the 38th parallel that continues to separate North and South Korea. The human cost of the Korean War was staggering. Estimates vary, but it's believed that around 3 million people died, the majority of them civilians. The war also had profound geopolitical consequences. It solidified the division of Korea, creating two states with radically different political and economic systems. South Korea, backed by the United States, would go on to become a major economic power and a vibrant democracy. North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, became one of the most isolated and repressive regimes in the world. The war also marked a turning point in the Cold War, leading to increased military spending in the United States and a more aggressive stance towards communist expansion globally. In war, there is no substitute for victory. As we look back on the Korean War, it's clear that its impact extends far beyond the peninsula itself. It set the template for how the Cold War would be fought, not through direct confrontation between the superpowers, but through proxy conflicts in third countries. It also demonstrated the limitations of American power, foreshadowing the challenges that would later be faced in Vietnam. Yet despite its significance, the Korean War remains somewhat overlooked in popular memory, particularly in the West. This is a shame, as I believe understanding this conflict is crucial to comprehending the complexities of the modern world, from the ongoing tensions in Northeast Asia to the broader dynamics of great power competition. In conclusion, the Korean War was a pivotal moment in 20th century history, one whose repercussions continue to be felt today. It was a conflict that began with a bang and ended with a whimper, leaving the Korean peninsula divided and setting the stage for decades of tension. As we continue to grapple with issues of nuclear proliferation and the challenge of North Korea, understanding this forgotten war becomes ever more important. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of ideological conflict and the long-lasting consequences of decisions made in the heat of battle. The Korean War was the first war in which the United Nations played a role, and it would be the first of many wars that the United States would fight in Asia. Thank you for watching this video on the Korean War. If you found it informative, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support really does make a difference and allows me to continue producing content on these important historical topics. If you have any thoughts or questions about the Korean War or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, take care.